Zipper rolls out to the right, pitches off to Taylor, and Taylor's to the 20, down to the 15, down to the 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Billy Taylor scored a touchdown from 21 yards out. The crowd goes berserk. It was November 22nd, 1969. That they came to Barry, Michigan, all dressed in maize and blue. The words were said, the prayers were read, and everybody cried. But when they closed the coffin, there was someone else inside. Oh, they came to Barry, Michigan, but Michigan wasn't dead. And when the game was over, it was someone else instead. 11 Michigan Wolverines put on the gloves of gray, and as the organ played the victors, they laid Woody Hayes away. Under center is Wangler at the 45. He goes back. He's looking for a receiver. He throws downfield to Carter. Who's got it better than us? Nobody!
Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Now that was worth waiting for. Going on the road and beating a ranked team soundly has not been the norm in the Jim Harbaugh era. It was an outstanding win. Our guest today is not easily impressed, and even he thought Saturday's performance was eye-opening. Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic joins us on our Michigan Game Day segment in just a minute or so. First, my view from Section 17 to get us started. One game does not make a season, we all know that. I expected Saturday's game might be a tight struggle, decided by turnovers, and maybe come down to which team could execute best in the fourth quarter. It never came to that. The offensive staff flat out had us ready to play. We made some first game mistakes, but nothing that can't be corrected. It was a solid A performance in my books. Don Brown's defense played well too. Sure, we gave up some points, maybe a few too many yards on the ground, but after all, that's nitpicking. Minnesota is a very good football team. Other than Justin Fields and Ohio State, we probably won't see a better passing team until December, and we held those Gophers in check. You know Don Brown will fix the mistakes, and the D will be better. I am counting on it. At least a solid B grade, I thought, for the defense. Now, special teams were sloppy. A blocked punt and 3 missed field goals. I don't like that, but again, I expect that will get cleaned up too. In the end, it was a great way to start the season in this very crazy year. I slept well on Saturday night, and I'm sure you did too. Up next is a visit from our buddies in East Lansing, and I have to believe they will not turn the ball over 7 times against us, and they will be a wee bit more motivated to play. Still, they look like a team that's under construction. My guest today says we can't look past Michigan State. It is still a rivalry, and we can't give them any hope this week. We have to bring our A game and put them away. Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic pays us a visit next here on The Michigan Man, so stay with us. Here with us on our Game Day segment to recap the big opener up in Minneapolis Saturday night and eventually look ahead to a visit from Sparty on Saturday is Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic. Once again, great to have you back, Nick.
Always good to be here, Mike. Thank you.
And wasn't it very different Saturday night? I think we're all getting used to the atmosphere at games these days, looking at the cutouts and spread out numbers of fans, but still, it was Big Ten football this time we were watching. It was nice, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I had a little bit of a head start because I've been doing more NFL stuff this year. So I've gotten a little used to, I was at Ford Field for the opener, so I've been in some of these games where there's no crowd, and it's weird, for the first, couple of drives, and then it gets weirdly normal and starts to feel like a regular football game. And I think for a lot of people, I told a lot of people that was probably going to be the case going into Saturday. And I think from the fan perspective, that's probably what it was, right? It felt, it's going to feel weird for the first quarter, maybe the first couple of drives, and then you're going to forget about it, and it's going to feel like a normal football game. And I assume that's what's happening on the field. So, that's been my experience with it. I'm watching all this stuff for the first, several weeks, and then, it felt that way again. I do gotta say that, Mike, I watched some of Wisconsin on Friday night, and that was weird. Because that stadium is so big, and it's going to be weird, I think, to see Michigan Stadium like that. I didn't see as much of Ohio State's game, but I think these big cathedrals that we're used to seeing so full, those are the ones that are going to be really alarming. I think some of these NFL stadiums are a little smaller, so it's a little different. But I got to say, yeah, Camp Randall empty that didn't stop getting weird. That was weird. That was weird for the whole game, but it's football, and we'll take it for sure.
Well, for sure. And any way you slice it on Saturday night, a big win up in Minnesota on the road against a ranked team, something Michigan has not done much of over the Harbaugh era. Yeah. And Joe Milton answered the bell with a solid performance, didn't he?
Yeah, did he ever? I mean, Mike, I would actually, and I'm not the guy that generally goes far north of, maybe hyperbolic or whatever, but I would go further than solid. Joe Milton was very good for a first time out there. That was, not only did I think that was the most impressive offensive debut as a team that Jim Harbaugh's had since he's been at Michigan, but overall, from a starting quarterback perspective, from game one for a guy who's never done it before, not just here but anywhere else, that to me was as electric or as eye-opening as anything we've seen from a Michigan quarterback since probably, and I had to think about it, but, and I know Denard played some in 2009, but when he started the 2010 season at home against UConn and lit it up and everybody was like, oh, okay, this is legit. That's what that sort of reminded me of. And, Michigan had talked all offseason about the growth of Joe Milton. If you talk to folks back even in December and January, they would tell you in sort of quieter moments that, boy, we really hope that Joe can turn a corner this year because we really think that he can be kind of the missing piece to everything we want to do on offense. And it was more of a hope at the time than it was a certainty. And as time wore on, when you get into a pandemic and you don't really have a lot of certainty to lean on and there aren't many answers and you're sort of looking, I think Michigan just put its faith in that hope and sort of rode with them and said, we're going to trust you and, we're going to ask that you trust us and sort of reciprocate it. And it appears so far, and it's one game and we got to keep that in mind, but that worked out and that was different. And that felt, like a lot of people turning a corner, Jim Harbaugh trusting a guy, not having to see a full body of a year's worth of work because he didn't have a choice. So they make a decision. Joe Milton looked good in the offseason. They trusted their look. They trusted what he was doing, and they rolled with it. And, I mean, my goodness, he was as prepared as any quarterback we've seen in the last several years to start a season. That was a good football team they were playing. Like you said, Mike, up the top, they had some guys missing. But, again, keep in perspective, this wasn't like starting a season against Central or Army or Appalachian State. This was starting against a ranked Big Ten opponent on the road. Joe Milton had a couple of hiccups in that game, but for the most part was very, very good, very smooth, and very under control. Beyond impressed. I don't know how else I could put it. That was as impressive an individual performance, both from poise and an overall dynamic, versatile standpoint that I can remember in the last decade from a Michigan quarterback right off the bat. So a lot to live up to in week two, but week one was very good, and I think we all thought to ourselves we just didn't know what it was going to look like. So. Very impressed. That was a very impressive debut for a guy who seems to fit everything they want to do. And really, from Josh Gaddis, I can't imagine he's any more excited than any point that he's been here so far.
No, I thought it was exciting to watch. And one of the things that I did like was how he spread the ball around to 9 receivers. He wasn't locking on to guys, at least not on this Saturday. No one in that receiving core really stood out. But still, the fact that so many guys got touches, I think, is big moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing to remember, and that's the offense. And last year there were days early in the season when they did look disjointed and they did look a little disorganized. But there were also days where we started criticizing, why aren't they sort of forcing the ball more to Donovan Peoples-Jones or Nico Collins down the field? And looking back with the benefit of hindsight, I think we can say that the offense really isn't designed to force anything to any one person in particular. It's designed to have a situation like sort of what Michigan has right now, where, 9 different receivers catch 15 passes, and you've got a lot of guys that are very similar in skill set, who can run a bunch of different stuff. Maybe not anybody who's dominant like a Nico Collins or, a dominant athlete like Donovan was, but a lot of guys who, if you give them an assignment and tell them what to do, they can execute it, and all of a sudden you force defenses to cover so much of the field because they're not worried about locking in on one particular thing, or they're not worried that you're going to take a shot to one guy on a 2-man route. It's going to be a 3 or 4-man route with a run tag on it. There's so much that defenses have to worry about with what Michigan does offensively, especially when you have a quarterback who is capable of being a full participant in the run game, which obviously Joe Milton can do to a level that, Shea Patterson just physically wasn't going to be able to give you. And then obviously we talked last year about, Shea got hurt, and that even limited it more. They're running a lot of stuff for Milton that they've never run for a quarterback here, not since Denard and maybe some Baumgardner stuff, but that's adding more to the pie here, and it's allowing them to really spread out what they're doing with personnel. A lot of guys played. You saw a lot of guys in the backfield get touches, in the past game, and everybody just sort of did their job. I mean, the thing that was alarming to me was, like you said, Mike, spreading the ball around, but also, they barely needed Giles Jackson in this game, and Giles Jackson might be their most explosive athlete offensively that's going to touch the ball. So, again, just well-disciplined effort from a team that was very well prepared. And I think that of all the overarching things, we can talk about the offense having another gear and all that stuff, but maybe the most impressive thing overall here, given what we've seen to start seasons the last couple of years, was that this was a Jim Harbaugh team that looked more like the Jim Harbaugh teams we were used to seeing when he first started here. The teams that were mentally disciplined. They didn't beat themselves. They had some issues. They had a couple penalties. It's the first game in a pandemic, but all things considered, given everything that we've seen this year, that was as efficient as I think a team could look. And that speaks to preparation from not only the guys on the field, but I think that speaks to what, especially Michigan's offensive staff, as it was remained intact in this offseason. I think it speaks to all the work they did. Josh Gaddis, Ed Warner, Jerome Moore, Jim Harbaugh, Jay Harbaugh, all those guys, to really sink into that, during those weird times this summer where you didn't have much, you couldn't do anything, you couldn't recruit, you couldn't do anything else. And I think they took full advantage of that. That was a very well prepared football team, as prepared as any Michigan team we've seen to start a year. And I don't know how long. Maybe I've been doing this 10 years, Mike. That was as well prepared game that a Michigan team has played in game one that I can think of in the 10 years that I've been doing this.
No, I agree with that. And, we know it all starts up front, too. And there were a lot of question marks about that offensive line. A lot of them, I think, answered partially on Saturday night. But Ed Warner did a great job getting the O-line ready. Yeah. And, again, say what you want about an inexperienced Minnesota front. You still have to block them. And the offensive line was very crisp.
Yeah, and it's one thing to just block them. It's another thing to just put them in the parking lot, and that's what they did. I mean, that's the thing to remember here. Because if it were something where we were seeing, that Michigan running at like 4 yards a carry, or there were some plays where they're getting knocked back and it was struggling a little bit, then maybe you could say, okay, well, maybe you'd like to see a little bit more because Minnesota was maybe a little thinner than they would have liked in terms of returning production and all that, but. That wasn't the case. Michigan was crashing holes open and, including Ben Mason into, that sort of H-back role. And also remembering that Nick Eubanks was actually out for this game. All the things at the disposal there, the front five, obviously bring Mayfield back, but a lot was made about what was Andrew Vastardis going to be able to give you inside, and really what was Chuck Filiaga, the only two guys in there that really haven't played. Ryan Hayes and Andrew Stuber have played before. So you're looking at Filiaga and Vastardis. What are they going to be able to give you? They held up. I mean, they did exactly what they were asked to do. Mayfield at times was completely dominant. Stuber in the run game at times looked very, I'll say, Nwayne-ish, in his ability to really sort of root guys out at the line of scrimmage and then climb the linebackers, and Ryan Hayes was just fine on the backside. It's not as good as they were at the end of last season, but I think you can see through 1 week why, Ed Warner and Jim Harbaugh were excited about where it could go, by the end of this 8-game run, if everyone stays healthy and tests negative and all that sort of thing. because they do have a lot of guys who are athletic. Ryan Hayes is probably a more athletic left tackle than John Runyon was, and John Runyon was a really good athlete. I think Stuber might be right there with Onwenu in terms of his ability to, move around a little bit inside as a guard. I mean, maybe not as good, but he's close. And then Mayfield came back to solidify a grade maybe as a first-round draft pick, and I think through one game that's what he did. So you have a first-round pick at right tackle. You have a left tackle who's kind of a prototype left tackle who's still learning. Filiaga is a guy who's had to sit and wait for a long time and has to be super hungry to get out there and play. Same thing with Vastardis, and Stuber also had to watch last season. You got a lot of hungry guys with something to prove who are all really good football players and are coached by one of the best offensive line coaches in the country. It worked out really well. It's the identity of Michigan's team. And, going forward, their run game becomes incredibly difficult to prepare for, because as you saw in that game, they can hit you from any direction with basically anybody on that sideline that comes in the game and can conceivably touch the ball can do something. So that is impressive. And, no matter what happened defensively, I got to a point in probably the second quarter where I said to myself, Michigan's winning this game. It's not going to matter because Minnesota can't stop them. And Gaddis knew it. Milton knew it. Harbaugh knew it. And they just did whatever they wanted offensively for the rest of the day, and that's how it ended.
Well, last year watching Charbonnet, he looked like, to me, a hard running back, blue-collar guy. But, all season long, he didn't look like a guy that was going to break the long ones, really never did. And, we learned in the offseason he was not 100% most of last year. But, man, he looked fast on Saturday night, didn't he?
Yeah, and that's the thing to remember is sometimes, especially if you're going to get a line that's going to crack a hole like that. I mean, the 70-yard run that he had was a massive rush lane, that featured terrific blocks from Mayfield and Stuber and Ben Mason. They caught Minnesota in the right call. I'm not sure if they had motion on that play or not, but I think they were able to move some defenders on the back end to mess with sort of the run fits. And at that point, you're not asking a guy to be a 4-3 runner. You're just saying, hey, we're giving you a pretty good head start here, man. If you can just finish this off and run in free space to the end zone, we're going to take it. And Charbonnet's fast enough to do that. And I think that's sort of the thing that I think a lot of people last year when you watched said, okay, he's probably not, a guy that's going to turn nothing into 70 yards. But if you give him room, he's going to make you pay. And, that's, kind of maybe like what Chris Evans can do. Blake Corum maybe has a little more speed in the straight line. And Haskins, while he's got a lot of the traits that Charbonnet has inside, maybe he's not quite as fast on the long run. But, I think Charbonnet's fast enough, and we saw Haskins had a nice run to a 66-yarder, I think it was, that if you're going to give him room like that, then I think that he's got enough to get there against most teams. Maybe not every team, but against most teams. And that's the thing that Gaddis talked about all offseason, was creating more explosives in the run game and really doing a lot of stuff. When you see a lot of the motion that they use, the orbit motion, the jet motion, all those things that move defenders around, a lot of that is done to mess with the secondary and the back end. So when those guys are in motion and moving around with Michigan's receivers, and if Michigan's offensive line can get, clean blocks at the point of attack, then all of a sudden that opens up lanes on the back end that wouldn't have been there. And if you're giving a running back a chance and saying, okay, all we're asking you to do at one point is beat one guy one-on-one. And, that's what they were able to do for those backs. Block it well enough, motion things, enough to get them moving and get them a little confused, and then say, just beat one linebacker and we're going to have a play here. That's kind of what Gaddis' entire thing is built around. It's very similar to what Joe Moorhead did at Penn State, and we've seen with Joe Moorhead and other places he's been. Very impressed again with Gaddis, but I think overall, everything sort of worked the way they wanted it to work. And I think that was the biggest takeaway. They have a lot more, I think, that they can do that they didn't have to do because they had like 480 yards on 55 plays. That's not a lot of plays. Everything worked, and, guys just executed. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway.
You mentioned Ben Mason earlier. He got more time on offense than I expected. I know there hasn't been a lot of access to the staff this season or this summer, but I didn't hear his name mentioned much as being used for anything. But if for nothing else than a blocker, it is great to see him being used. And that touchdown was sweet. The dive, he showed some athleticism there too.
It's going to be an interesting 8 weeks for Ben Mason, I think. He's a guy that I was saying this yesterday to somebody. I think it was maybe talking to Austin Meek, actually, who I work with here at The Athletic. I'd kind of forgotten about Ben Mason. Like you said, last year, obviously they were tinkering with him as a defensive tackle. They didn't know what to do with him. Obviously the fullback thing just was not going to be a piece of Josh Gaddis' offense. I wondered at the time, maybe that H-back role could be something he could fill in, but it was going to have to be an adjustment for him, and he'd spent so much time working with the defense that it felt like it was going to take a minute. And then sort of you forget about him, and then he gets in there on Saturday and makes a couple of blocks, and you remember that, they started to tinker with that a little bit late last year, and all of a sudden, he looks like a guy who, as an H-back, as kind of not quite a tight end, but sort of a move blocker who can get out and maybe run a couple routes and, catch the ball too. We see guys like this in the NFL, Mike. This is not a thing that just sort of comes out of nowhere. Now, all of a sudden, this is something where Ben Mason, if he can get out there, show some of the hands, right, that we saw, the athleticism, jumping over the pylon, and some of the blocks he had between the tackles were outstanding. This is a guy who I'm not saying he's going to get drafted or anything else, but I'm just saying this is a guy that if this continues for him in this role, because it's a perfect fit with what they want to do, he's athletic enough to give linebackers some trouble. And when he just decides to, put his sort of foot down and plant into a guy, they're moving for the most part. So I don't know. I mean, they found a really nice role for him. I think that's a really good weapon to have. And again, I think it adds to your diversity as an offense, because it's not a tell when he's in the game, because he can slip out, and run a route. He can do something in the flat if you leave him alone. You're not trying to hand him the ball necessarily. I wouldn't advise anyone to do that going forward. But there are things that Gaddis can do with him that really, really could help Michigan an awful lot, more than I think I realized or thought about going into the season. And suddenly after that one, he'll get attention from scouts after that. I promise you, they'll look at that and say, okay, if depending on the offense you run in the NFL, we see guys like Kyle Juszczyk in San Francisco, guys like that. I mean, there's spots now for players like this moving forward, and that's got to be exciting for Ben Mason, something to push for as he goes forward. And a great job by Michigan to really carve a role for him that really does fit his unique sort of skill set very well, and gives him a chance to be excited about it. And that had to be cool to see for everybody. I know everybody up there loves Ben Mason, and he got a little lost last year, in between positions, all that, and that's got to be neat for everybody to see him sort of settle into a role that really fits him, Mike, I think better than anything he's done so far. And he was so good at that short yardage fullback in the old offense. He could actually, I think, maybe be better in this role here with Gaddis.
Oh, it's going to be exciting to see what they do with him. And overall, the offense, outstanding for an opener, so I give them an A grade on that.
Yep.
Over on the defensive side, there have been questions heading into Saturday as to whether Michigan's defense could slow down Minnesota. Overall, they did a really nice job. The defensive front, a lot of people have asked questions, raised concerns going into the season. What was your takeaway on their play, Nick?
Yeah, Jeter was better than I thought he'd be. That was another guy that, they said a couple times over the years that, Jeter was coming. He was right there, and then we'd never see it. He answered the bell. I mean, I think that we can say that. He had that, he was right place, right time on that touchdown, but he was also making stuff happen inside, holding the rope a little bit. Carlo Kemp, I think, was, very familiar with what we saw last season from Carlo Kemp. Hinton got in there some, maybe wasn't dominant, but got in there some. And then Hutchinson and Pay made a ton of plays. I think the thing that as the game wore on, Michigan's sort of thinned out. They still don't have a lot of depth up there. Julius Wolshoff came in and played some on third down, I think a little bit, played inside and rushed inside. They got David Ajabo in there a little bit in situations. So maybe those guys will come around as time wears on here. I thought the depth sort of thinned out a little bit as the game wore on, which is understandable. Hutchinson and Pay are going to have to play a ton. I think they held up for the most part, but there were times, where they started to get rooted out of there a little bit easier, in the second half. And then there were times also in the second level where some of the run fits got a little wobbly. There were times maybe where Michigan was flowing a little too hard and got caught. And Minnesota's got a difficult run game to stop. I mean, Ibrahim can make a nice cut here and there, and he did. He got him on a couple of bounces where they were pinching hard inside and was able to get wide on him. I think those are all assignment issues. I think those are all mostly correctable. I think there was enough in there to be looked at as positive to build on forward to say that they should be better than that, going forward. But I also, Mike, I don't think I would say that I would expect Michigan to be so dominant against the run this year to something that we've gotten familiar seeing from some of the better defenses they've had. I just don't know if they have enough depth to do that against everybody. But, they have enough depth and they have enough guys who can make plays to be good against the run, maybe not great against the run, and maybe in this one they were a little bit above average at times and then a little bit below at other times. So I think a lot of the stuff is correctable. In some ways I was pleasantly surprised maybe by how some guys performed, but also in other ways, you'd like to see a little bit more in terms of, gap discipline and all that. But that's the better news, I guess, for that would be is that all that stuff, the gap soundness and everything, that's stuff that Don Brown can fix and probably will fix, as they go forward here. So all things considered, Minnesota's got a good offense. They were shorthanded a little bit on the offensive line, but that offense is hard to stop. They RPO so much. You've got to be really disciplined on the back end and in the middle with, your reads and everything, or they're going to pick you apart. So all things considered, I thought Minnesota was going to score points in this game, and they did. So I think I wasn't shocked by it. But there are certainly things to improve on.
Well, you mentioned surprises on the defense as far as performances from Michigan. To me, that means Michael Barrett. I mean, he's another one of these kids we've been hearing the staff talk about for a couple of years, saying, wait until you see this kid make an impact. And it hadn't happened until Saturday night. He turned in a more than impressive performance, didn't he, Nick?
Yes, absolutely. I think I put Barrett in almost like the Milton category of you're just going to have to believe him. And, I think that we saw, unlike Milton, we saw so little of Joe in games. And I guess the same thing could be true for Mike Barrett. But every time you'd see Mike Barrett get out there and do anything, whether it was special teams or in a spring game or something, the last couple of years, there was just so much zip in what he was able to do. I mean, he was so fast in high school and so explosive as that option quarterback. That I just knew somewhere in the back of my mind. I mean, I've been talking about Michael Barrett for 2 years, right? Like I thought there was 2 years ago, I thought that, after Devin Bush left, I'd wondered if Don Brown was going to turn Michael Barrett into an inside linebacker, kind of like Devin Bush, and say, we're going to have another guy in 2 years that can play inside and run 4-4. He kept him at Viper, and now he has a, second, third level hybrid who can blitz, defend the run, and cover in space, who can run a 4-5, 4-4, whatever it is. I mean, he is so physically gifted. It was just one of these things where, similar to Josh Uche, similar maybe to even like a Josh Metellus, a guy that comes in, has a lot of stuff that you really like, but you don't really know what to do with him yet, and you just give it a minute, and you let him sort of grow, and you bounce him around a little bit, and you tinker with where he's at, and then they find a spot for him, and they leave him there, and they let him grow into it. And I think you saw the fruits of that labor, kind of come out yesterday or Saturday. And I think that Don Brown's done that a couple times, and it's been underrated. And I think a lot of times people get really hot about, and rightly so sometimes, Michigan missing out on, stud recruits defensively, guys that are just game changers, the 5-star athletes that you can't coach some of this stuff. But I think that what Michigan has been able to do at times defensively is they have been able to find guys like this, the guys that have a couple of traits athletically that are really special and have the right kind of mindset to do something defensively to where they can kind of work it around. Brad Hawkins is another one. Brad Hawkins came here as a receiver and might get drafted now as a safety. They just do a really nice job of finding the best traits that some of these guys have, especially, linebackers and secondary, guys, and then really carving out roles for them and letting them grow into it, not rushing it, not forcing them into something before they're ready. And, Michael Barrett wasn't perfect. There was a lot of stuff that he'll have to clean up, but I mean, in terms of activity, he's everywhere, and that's what you want him to do. So game one, I think that was, and nobody could really be overly disappointed in that one. He returned a kick 60 yards for crying out loud. This is the type of guy that, can make a difference for you if you put him in the right spot and cut him loose and let him go. And, I know they've been waiting for a good while on that, to let him get out there and get him some room to do it. So, cool to see him get that chance. I saw him throw up a couple times and then still stay on the field, right? So everybody's got to like the effort there as well. So, a very impressive start for Mike Barrett, and interested to see where that all goes.
And back in the secondary, Nick, in particular the corners, a lot of folks had questions about that part of the game heading into a Saturday night. I thought they held up really well against what everyone thinks is a very good passing attack, Nick.
Yeah, Jim and Green hung in there. I think that's probably the word you said it, Mike. I think I'll use that as well. Hung in there, didn't get roasted. It wasn't something where, if he got, into a situation where it was him and Rashad Bateman. It wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't something where it was like, oh God, this is going to be a disaster. And we see that in college football a lot, right? I mean, there were some times where it was a little wobbly, but it wasn't bad. It wasn't it wasn't a nightmare. I think that's the takeaway, and it could have been. I mean, it very easily could have been. I mean, none of these guys, outside of Hawkins, Daxton Hill, who we'll have to see, what's going on with his health and everything, and then Vince Gray, the rest of them, they just haven't played. And so you're really sort of asking them to sort of hold the level of what the guys around them are doing. And I think for the most part, Gemon Green's a long player with 6'1", 6'2", good frame, who, again, they brought him in here in 2018 and let him just sort of, him and Sammy Foston and some of these younger guys, Mike Barrett, they just sat and learned. And, you when you do that, you really gotta get something out of them when they become juniors. Otherwise, it turns into, sort of like, what did you take him for, right? And Harbaugh's staff, I think, if we give them criticism for some stuff in recruiting, we have to give them credit for their ability to take some of these guys that you scratch your head about, and then 3 years later you say, okay, well, that guy's not bad. Maybe he's not a first-round draft pick, but he's certainly playable. And obviously we're going to see more from Gemon Green, but I mean, he, right now looks like he's hanging in there and, going to improve, going to keep getting better. Again, that's Tanner Morgan's not a chump. That's as good a quarterback as they're going to see, not named Justin Fields.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll see if Graham Mertz, it looks like he, may have tested positive for COVID. So maybe Graham Mertz doesn't play in that game. He might've been the other one, but Tanner Morgan can play football and he can make plays. And, they got enough in his face with the pass rush to help out, and the secondary held up. And, obviously you're going to want Daxton Hill back in there as soon as possible because of all the things he can sort of do for you, but not bad, and I think all things considered, it's important to remember that while Minnesota was missing players and PJ Fleck made sure to make that perfectly clear to everyone 1,000 times, both before the game and afterward, and will continue to do so, Minnesota's got a lot of good football players, and they're a good team with a lot of talent and a team that gave a lot of people a lot of problems last year, a hard offense to prepare for. And overall, you look at the numbers at the end of the day, and I don't think you can be too upset about it. I mean, given everything that we've seen this summer and the inconsistencies with practice times and everything else, I think you'll take it all day and you'll be happy with it and you move forward and try to get better.
Well, so many positives for a first game on both sides of the ball. One of the things that was worrisome were special teams. And when you look around college football so far this year, there have been a lot of teams struggling with special teams. We had one punt blocked, 3 missed field goals from Jake Moody, which really surprised me because he is usually Mr. Consistent, isn't he?
Yeah, that was weird. That really was. It was, and I don't know if Nordine, it sounded like Nordine might be hurt or something, but we've seen those inconsistencies from Nordine enough times to a point where Jake Moody probably wouldn't be kicking if we hadn't seen enough of those inconsistencies from Nordine. And the reason why he's kept the job has been his ability to stay consistent from 40 and in, and I think that's the thing that he was giving them so much over the last couple of years, that, from 40 yards in, he was the more consistent option. Nordine has got that big leg and has boomed a few in there that, you've sort of turned your head at over the last couple of years. But in sort of those intermediate areas, sometimes he can get a little ahead of himself and push the ball where we haven't seen that as much from Moody. And then we did in this one. I don't know. I mean, it's, they've got 2 kickers. I mean, I think that if nothing else, you can sort of look somewhere else and see what you can get out of them. But the blocked punt, you don't like that either. That's not great to start out. But that also might be something where when I went out there for the very beginning of NFL training camp, and they had such a short time window, and everything was so limited with what they could do in terms of team practice. The first thing that we saw that went away was special teams reps. They had to cut them. They had to cut into a lot of them because they just didn't have time. And I have to think that Michigan probably was under a similar situation. Obviously, that doesn't excuse Moody. He's going to get as many kicking reps as he wants during a practice. But a lot of those special teams reps that you probably are getting in a fall camp were probably very condensed. And not probably, I'm sure they absolutely were very condensed.
Yeah.
And, it's something they're going to have to sort of adjust to as the year goes forward here. But the kicking part, that's something where maybe you chalk it up to a bad day. Kickers are kind of tough to, they're a lot like golfers. Sometimes that's just a bad, their swing was bad that day and you got to go out there and find it again. And, we'll see. I mean, I would think that if he firmly won the job and if Nordin is dinged up, then I would think they'll give him another chance because that's kind of how Harbaugh's handled his kickers. But he's not going to give him forever. He's not going to give him all the ropes. So, maybe it's if you miss one more, we're going with somebody else, or maybe if Nordin can come back and have a better week of practice, then he gets it too. But that'll be one that I guess we'll have to watch, as the season goes on here.
And I'm sure, as Jim will say, that will be a point of emphasis this week in practice,
Yep.
but that can be fixed, so I'm not so worried about that. Up next, though, Michigan State, and yes, we know they had no spring practice. Preparation time for the new staff very short, but man, that Rutgers loss was ugly, wasn't it?
Yeah, brutal. And brutal for a lot of reasons, and one of which was, the turnovers. Some of them were just straight up careless. A team that obviously, and I think that what we're seeing here is in August when the season was canceled or postponed or whatever, a team like Michigan continued to practice, right? Even the day that they canceled the season, Michigan practiced that day. They just kept practicing. Michigan State, not having spring ball and really anything with the team, decided at that time, because it looked like nobody was going to play, they went back to weight training and then had to go back to practice several weeks later. They just haven't. They were not ready to play football. That's the bottom line. And if folks want to criticize Mel Tucker for that, I suppose that's their right to do. But you could criticize maybe the strategy in the unknown time where no one knew what was going on. But I don't know how you're supposed to do that either. They just weren't ready to play, and I'm not sure that we should have been very surprised by it. A lot of the miscommunication stuff that they had was really a result of bad timing and guys just not being ready to be in that sort of football mode, which is certainly concerning. The offensive line was not very good at all, and then defensively, a lot of those it was a lot of assignment uncertainty, which is not what we're used to seeing from Michigan State defensively. So they have so much to fix and no time to do it. If you're looking at the matchup in this game, Michigan's ability to run the ball, if I'm Michigan State, is probably the thing that's terrifying me the most. I'm not sure how much Michigan's going to need to put the ball in the air in a game like this, or how much they're even going to want to. I would think that they'll work to sort of do what they do in the ground game and mess with Michigan State's sort of discipline and fits, and then really kind of mash up front, because again, if you go back and look, Michigan State lost so much last year, in the front seven, from last year to this year, in terms of Kenny Willekes and Mike Panashuk and Joe Bocci, Raekwon Williams. These guys are gone, and those guys were guys that played and started for 3 years and who were all very good players who could sort of hold the rope in there. And it's all brand new now, and it just isn't very good. So Michigan State is really kind of digging itself out of a hole that was kind of created by Mark D'Antonio, I would say, a hole that was left by Mark D'Antonio, I'll say. And the pandemic didn't help anything. But Mike, we saw last fall, Michigan was far and away a more talented and better football team than Michigan State on that day in Michigan Stadium. And I think that was the takeaway then, and it's the takeaway right now, is that it's going to have to take, I would think, a pretty crazy effort for Michigan State, and Michigan's going to have to obviously make sure that it doesn't get too, kind of fat and happy here and keep its nose to the grindstone. But if Michigan does what it's supposed to do in this game, it's a 24-point Vegas line for a reason. The talent, Michigan has the talent advantage at pretty much every spot now. That is something that we probably don't talk about a lot. We talked about it a lot early in the Harbaugh era, right? Where maybe Michigan people talk about it a lot, but it's not talked about as much nationally as it used to be. When Harbaugh got this job, it was before you even worry about beating Ohio State, you have to fix this Michigan State stuff. And we got so hung up on that punt game was crazy. They get the win in year 2, and then they had that weird rain hurricane thing where they turned the ball over 10 times or whatever it was. But otherwise, Harbaugh flipped the recruiting, started winning some of those battles Michigan was losing, and has a better team. They're more talented. They were better coached last year. Obviously, in this situation, they're probably going to be more prepared again. Michigan's a better program right now. It's impossible to say otherwise. And this is a game where, people, when the Harbaugh era started, where Michigan fans were clamoring for the days of, can we get back to playing Michigan State in this situation where it's going to be stunning if they can compete with us, right? In the game physically with talent and everything else. That is what this feels like right now, though, given what we know about Michigan State's pride and an ability to sort of get up for this game. I don't think that can be discounted either, but it's difficult to see how this goes anyway, but Michigan taking care of what it needs to take care of and moving forward. If it doesn't, they're going to have no one but themselves to look at, and that'll be the takeaway, I think, right now going into this.
Well, the final question for you, Nick, before we let you get away. We didn't know what to expect from a lot of teams in the conference when play started over the weekend. That said, there were some really interesting games. I thought Indiana beating Penn State was a shocker to me. Watching Northwestern explode on offense against Maryland, and then Ohio State, they looked as scary as advertised. It was an interesting first weekend of play, wasn't it?
It was. And, it was one where, I thought long and hard about this, and I still don't know. Well, we'll see. But I think that if you had a team that had a really good coaching staff from a teaching standpoint, then you were going to be in such a better situation, in this weird year like this. And I think that what you just said it there, Mike, Indiana's staff, Tom Allen, the job that he and his staff have done the last several years to get Indiana so close so many times to beating teams like this. Indiana's staff is very good, and they replaced some people, but by and large, that is a really good coaching staff that maxes out guys, and you saw it. Penn State, sometimes they struggle with that, and we saw that, you know what I mean? Like that was an example, I thought, where that kind of showed up, and then in other spots, obviously, Ohio State's going to be Ohio State. Northwestern making a change, with the offensive coordinator and then bringing in Peyton Ramsey was something that, I think everybody who's a Northwestern fan was begging for an offensive coordinator change. And then obviously bringing in a guy like Ramsey certainly helps out a lot there. That's just interesting to see. Although Maryland, I wouldn't call, much of a team that, Maryland's got so many questions, from last year heading into this year. And then, Mike, when I look at Michigan, I think that overall with the guys they brought back, the staff was retained completely offensively for the first time since, I think, 2016. I thought they did a nice job last year after kind of a rocky start. And, once they all sort of got in on the same page with Gaddis, they were able to really, get some good things going. And I think, again, I think Gaddis is a really smart coach. I think he knows what he's doing. I think his vision makes a lot of sense. He needed a quarterback that could really tie it all together, and I think Milton might be that guy. But more important, Ed Warner is a terrific teacher. I think, guys love working with Sharon Moore. I think, you have to give Ben McDaniels a lot of credit for what he was able to do with Milton in a weird quarterback year and everything else. Jay Harbaugh was a super underrated coach last year with the stuff that he was able to do with the running backs. I think that you have to give credit to Michigan's offensive staff, top to bottom, for the job they did this offseason in not just diving into the things that they had problems with last year and finding out ways to fix those with the extra time that they had on their hands, but also with their ability to get everyone on the team who can conceivably come close to playing bought in to the concept of this is going to be an all-11 offense where all 11 are going to do something and we're all going to play a part and we're all going to have the ability to impact each other's success. There was not any whining or griping about why isn't so-and-so getting 8 touches or why isn't so-and-so getting this or why, no one is saying that. This is a group that everybody's kind of in the spot they need to be in and everybody understands what they're trying to do. No one's trying to do too much. I think this was a terrific summer, given all things that they had to work with. It was a bad summer overall for everyone to have to deal with. But, through 1 week, I don't know how else we can say it. I think Michigan's offensive staff answered the bell in really trying times. It helped out a ton that Harbaugh kept them all together and didn't make any changes. And I think that you're starting to see it now. I think that this is a group that knows what it's doing. It's well coached, well disciplined. It's unselfish, and it likes each other. Sometimes that's all you need. And I think that, I wrote Saturday night or Sunday morning, whatever time it was there when I finally finished it, that Jim Harbaugh's teams have, over the years, been at their best when they've been able to sort of mimic his ability to put blinders on and ignore everything around him and just focus on nothing but football. His teams have been at their best when they've been able to do that. The first 2 teams he had here were able to do that. This team on Saturday, that's what that was. And if they do that for another 7 weeks, then I think a lot of people are going to be pleasantly surprised with what happens here. But they have to keep doing it. And I think that's the important thing. if they can keep their focus at a ridiculous level, which is what Harbaugh sort of demands, and a lot of times that's hard to match. But if they can keep it there, then they're going to like what they see. It's going to be a tough task, but so far I would have to say so good.
Absolutely. Great week one. Now it's Michigan State and have to keep up the hard work. So we'll see. It's going to be a lot of fun. Our guest here on our Michigan Game Day segment this week, recapping the opener with Minnesota and looking ahead to the Spartans, has been Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic. We will, in the coming weeks, down the road, get you back on the show and see what's going on in Michigan football.
Sounds good, Mike. Take care.
On Quick Hits today, on Monday's radio show, Jim updated injuries. Dax Hill, who didn't play in the second half on Saturday, should be back at practice on Tuesday or Wednesday. It sounds like he'll be ready to go for Sparty. No details on his injury were discussed. Quinn Nordin was working through something last week and had a setback in practice. Jim expects he'll be ready for action on Saturday too. The only other injury mentioned was Nick Eubanks. Jim said he should find out midweek what his status is. Other than that, we came out of week one healthy as far as we know. On Thursday's Visitors Edition, we will be joined by Graham Couch, the longtime Spartan beat writer from the Lansing State Journal, so make sure you join us for that. Remember to tell your friends and family about the show and give us that 5-star rating wherever you get your podcast from. Any comments on the program would also be appreciated. That will do it for another Game Day edition. Thanks again to Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic for being so gracious with his time. He is one of the best college football writers in the business, and he's always a great guest. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Until we meet again on Thursday, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!